Seated, we'll get started in 1 minute. Good morning. My name is Captain Casey Welch. I serve the United States Army as a military intelligence officer and a SkillBridge intern with the Office of Military Affiliated Communities at the University of Chicago. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you all to today's U.S. Army and U.S. Army Medicine professional panel on Army Medicine and Army Chaplaincy in recognition of Veterans Day. A special thank you to all our distinguished guests for coming out. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the presentation of the colors by the University of Chicago ROTC. Color Guard. Thank you. You may now be seated. We gather today to express our deep gratitude to the men and women who have served and continue to serve our country with dedication and sacrifice. This morning, we are particularly pleased to host a discussion that highlights the vital roles of Army medicine and Army chaplaincy in promoting holistic wellness and resilience for soldiers and their families. I want to thank each of you for being here today for a compelling conversation about chaplaincy and spiritual care in the Army. It is my distinct honor to introduce our next speaker, Dean James Theodore Robinson, a distinguished scholar and leader of the field of religious studies, the Dean of the University of Chicago Divinity School, and the Nathan Cummings Professor of Jewish Studies. Under Dean Robinson's leadership, the Divinity School continues to be a global leader in the academic study of religion, fostering dialogue across disciplines and communities. Dean Robinson is deeply committed to ensuring that the Divinity School remains a space where pressing questions about faith, society, and meaning are thoughtfully and critically engaged. Please join me in welcoming Dean James Theodore Robinson.
Good morning. Thank you, Captain Welch. Thank you for your thoughtful introduction, and thank you for the organization of the event. Welcome, Provost Baker. Welcome, Dr. Terrell Odom. Welcome, distinguished guests, to the University of Chicago's annual Veterans Day event. Veterans Day is a most important occasion to honor the service and sacrifices of those who have served in the armed forces. On this day, let us also take a moment to acknowledge the families of our veterans. Behind every service member is a network of loved ones who support them through the challenges of military life. These families bear their own burdens and make their own sacrifices, and they too deserve our gratitude. As we observe Veterans Day, I'm honored to host this panel as a renewed commitment to our support for veterans. The Divinity School. The Divinity School is a global leader in the study of religion and approaches religious studies and religious leadership with attention to inquiry, innovation, and awareness of how scholarship impacts questions of public and contemporary concern. The school is working to develop a chaplaincy concentration within the MDiv degree that includes chaplaincy-specific coursework in multi-religious, multicultural practice, preparing students to provide compassionate, culturally competent care in various venues. We are situated across the street from University of Chicago-Medicine, the academic medical health system known for rigorous research and community engagement at the forefront of healthcare. Working in partnership, the Divinity School and U Chicago Medicine provide abundant resources for exceptional spiritual care, education, and training, with the potential for developing new knowledge and practices in holistic care for patients and their families, hospital staff, and our wider community as well. The Clinical Pastoral Education Program, CPE, at U Chicago Medicine and the Master of Divinity program, the MDiv, within the Divinity School offer uncommon value through research and training in holistic and inclusive spiritual care, preparing diverse candidates for careers as spiritual care practitioners, including chaplaincy. We are proud to enroll students who are interested in military chaplaincy. Military chaplaincies are key in supporting the spiritual and emotional needs of those in the armed forces. The University of Chicago Office of Military Affiliated Communities, in collaboration with the Divinity School and U Chicago Medicine, provides ideal training for military chaplains through the Divinity School's multi-religious coursework that develops students for interfaith chaplaincy, and U Chicago Medicine's CP programs access to the renowned trauma unit at the University of Chicago Medical Center. You will hear from one of their trauma surgeons today. Combining the non-denominational MDiv curriculum and the hands-on CPA rotations at the Trauma Center offers aspiring chaplains a unique blend of theological and traditional knowledge and practical real-world experience, preparing them to excel in their roles. As we reflect on the complex challenges faced by those who serve in the armed forces, it is heartening to know that their care extends beyond physical healing. Army medicine and Army chaplaincy, working in close collaboration, ensure that the emotional, spiritual, and psychological needs of our soldiers and their loved ones are also met. This integrated approach to wellness aligns closely with our values here at the university, where we seek to provide best-in-class holistic care. On behalf of the University of Chicago Divinity School, I thank each of you for being here today, and I extend my deepest gratitude to our distinguished guests for sharing their time and their expertise with us to follow. It is now my honor to introduce you to Provost Catherine Baker. Catherine Baker serves as the 15th Provost of the University of Chicago. Prior to this role, she served as Dean of the University of Chicago Harris School for Public Policy. She is a leading scholar of health economics whose research has been widely published and has played prominently in debates about reform of the U.S. healthcare system. She serves on the Congressional Budget Office's panel of health advisors and has been a commissioner on the Medicare Payment Advisory Committee and a Senate-confirmed member of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. She is, more as well, she is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and serves as a director of Eli Lilly and a trustee of the Mayo Clinic. There is much more, but please join me now in welcoming Provost Baker.
Thank you for that excessive introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. This is such a wonderful opportunity for us to honor our veterans and those in military service. And today is, of course, a special day for that. But every day we are so lucky at the university to have these members of our community. We take great pride at the University of Chicago in welcoming a diverse set of views and diverse experiences to advance our understanding of the world with as much richness and depth as possible. That requires having everyone at the table. And so the opportunity to host our veteran scholars and support their families redounds to the benefit of the whole university. And I was telling our distinguished guests, it is a real source of pride for this university to be able to host this community. So thank you all again for being here. This partnership in advancing whole care for our service people, but also for all of those we serve at the University of Chicago is a wonderful example of the benefit of bringing together different disciplines. People come to us as whole people with a diverse set of needs and with a diverse set of experiences, and if we treat just the wound, we're missing an opportunity to really support people in health and well-being. That's the spirit that is exemplified in the medicine that we try to provide and the vital role that chaplaincy plays in that. It's also, I think, representative of how we try to support our own veteran scholars. That holistic, arms around the whole person approach, I think, is particularly effective given how much social determinants of health and outside experiences play in people's physical health and mental health and overall well-being. So it is a wonderful opportunity for us to learn from people who are working so hard at that intersection. Dean Robinson spoke in specific about the training that we offer here and what a great day it is to bring some of that expertise in professional development. It is something where I hope the University of Chicago can make a unique contribution. Our medical center is integrated with the rest of our campus. It's not separately owned and it's not a bus ride away. It's right over there. Especially on a beautiful day like today, you can just walk right on over. And that is an opportunity for free-flowing ideas and care and engagement from the Divinity School to the School of Public Policy to the medical care that we deliver. And that's something that we are really trying to do as much with as we can as a university. Our full-time chaplains are a vital part of that fabric. They're on call 24/7, available to help patients through whatever is happening in their lives. And that resource is so deeply appreciated by all of those who have the need of taking advantage of that. This is a model of professionalism for our CPE students, and this is a great chance to propagate that to the next generation of those leaders. So I want to just close again by thanking you all for being here, and particularly thanking OMAC and particularly Terrell, but the whole team that he works with, including Bridget Collier, Mitchell Kitlaus, Scott Velasquez. There's a whole team supporting the work that goes on here. It's never enough people. I wish that we could have even more because the work is so important to the university, but I'm always so impressed by the output of that work, which I see in the faces of all of the people here and beyond. So thank you so much. Today's discussion, sponsored by OMAC and iHouse, our host, and our medical center and the Divinity School, brings together leaders from Army Medicine and Army Chaplaincy. We're fortunate to have with us Chaplain Mark Lee, Chaplain Colonel Ibrahim Rahim, Colonel Timothy Plackett, Colonel Samuel Preston, and their experience, I think, will shed light on so many of the opportunities and challenges that they're contributing to addressing. So thank you for that. Thank you all for being here and having the opportunity to mark our appreciation for the dedication and sacrifice of all of our people in service and all of our veterans. So thank you, and let me turn it back over to Captain Welch.
Thank you, Provost Baker and Dean Robinson. At this time, I ask you all to join me in a moment of silence. Let us reflect on the courage and resilience of our MIAs and POWs and renew our commitment to never forget their sacrifice. Let us also hold their families in our thoughts as they continue to await answers and closure. Thank you. Let us carry the memory of these brave individuals with us, and may we continue to honor them through our actions and words. Their courage and sacrifice will never be forgotten. Now I would like to welcome Chaplain Christy Torres to the stage to begin our event. Chaplain Torres is a captain in the U.S. Army and stationed in Chicago as a chaplain recruiter. She is the moderator of today's discussion.
Well, good morning. I would like to welcome all of our panelists to the podium. Oh. Well, it's an honor for me to be with you all today, a panel focused on the impact of Army medicine and Army chaplaincy's efforts on soldiers and their families on their health. And so I feel that it's very appropriate to honor our veterans on Veterans Day. And so, yeah, I would like to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. Chaplain Colonel Mark Lee, he's second to the right here. He is Graduate School Dean of the U.S. Army Institute for Religious Leadership, Fort Jackson, South Carolina, U.S. Army Chaplain Representative, Chaplain Colonel Abraham Rahim. He is the Director of School for Spiritual Care, U.S. Army Clinical Pastoral Education, Graduate School. U.S. Army Institute for Religious Leadership, also coming from Fort Jackson, South Carolina, our U.S. Army Chaplain Representative. Colonel Timothy Plackett. He is a U.S. Army Reserve, University of Chicago trauma surgeon, also with the 374th Hospital Center Deputy Commander for Surgical Services. He is our U.S. Army Medicine representative. And then Colonel Samuel Preston, Commander at Blanchfield Army Community Hospital in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He has served as the psychiatry consultant to the Army Surgeon General from 2018 to 2022. He is our U.S. Army Medicine representative. So please welcome our panelists this morning. So for our first question, for our medical professionals. So to begin our discussion, can you share an example of how chaplaincy has impacted your work?
Testing, okay. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say what a privilege it is to join you today, and what a phenomenal discussion, because truly the relationship that chaplains and the medical community, distinct from the military, but in general, is indivisible. And I'll just share, as I was preparing this, I talked with my hospital chaplains on this very topic, on where the nexus of the medical discipline and the chaplain discipline as a profession come together. And what we were struggling with is they are so intertwined, it was difficult for us to define where they aren't together. And I'll just share a brief kind of tidbit that the chaplain resonated with me, and that is when we do medicine, in general, day to day, we take care of healthy people. But there are very, very challenging times for our medical teams and our patients where we have to talk about life and death, very, very existential topics. And the chaplain shared with me about a diagnosis that was given. It was pancreatic cancer, which is essentially a death sentence when you're given that diagnosis. And the patient received that information, the life expectancy, the next steps. And there was a lot of information that was shared. And when the chaplain came in as a part of our holistic way of how we treat patients, they processed that diagnosis, but then said, tell me about how you want to die. How do you want to leave this world with dignity? And that is truly holistic care, if you think about it. And chaplains are able to have that disarming conversation just because of who they are as professionals, that they can talk about those very, very difficult existential things that we need to face in medicine. And chaplains, in my experience at my community hospital, serving Middle Tennessee in Fort Campbell, we appreciate what our chaplains bring and how they are able to have those very difficult conversations with our patients and meet them where they are as they're defining their transition and making the very difficult decisions, not only in life, but in the service of their country. So that's one area that I'd like to share. I'm interested to hear what my colleague says.
Yeah. First of all, I see a lot of veterans I know in the room, and so thank you for coming and spending your Veterans Day with us. Thank you, General, for joining us today. To your question about how does the chaplaincy help and support, I'm the trauma surgeon, right? So, whether it's here, whether it's on a deployment, if I'm meeting you, you're probably not having a good day. It's probably going to be what is the worst day of your life and your family's life. And probably the most humbling thing I can have to do is if your heart has stopped, to open your chest, put my hands on your heart to try to get it beating again or fix the problem with the heart. And there's something that we all hold sacred about the heart. And when I have to do that, or have to ask another soldier to do that so I can do the other things I have to do, I know somebody emotionally, spiritually is in that room that's not prepared for that moment. And on deployment, I got a new team every time. I can't predict who it's going to be. So the first thing I've always learned to do is call the chaplain, because they're available. Immediately call the chaplain. And I need them there for the patient, but I also need them there for the team. And that's, even here, at the University of Chicago, that's where our chaplaincy really sets themselves apart, is not only do they know how to care for the patient and their family, but they're able to help take care of the team. They're able to help notice that, Dr. Plackett, I noticed that one really kind of tore you up. You didn't show it to the family, but I saw you were different. And they provide you that room, that grace to discuss what happened, to process what's going on, and to make it possible for you to take care of the next patient that's going to come in. Because whether it's on a deployment, whether it's here stateside, in my line of work, there's going to be another one. And having that partnership is critical to being able to do that job.
Thank you. I heard you both say that you integrate the chaplains into your work in a way to enter the stress that your patients are experiencing. Okay, and now for both chaplains and our medical professionals, how do Army medicine and Army chaplaincy work together? We kind of addressed that, to ensure that soldiers and their families receive holistic care that address not only the physical injuries, but also the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual trauma. Chaplain Mark Lee, could you go first, please, sir?
All right, I've been volunteered to respond first. I will do that. I think of so many different examples, but kind of going back to what these two doctors have offered, in the moment when the little whatever hits the fan, and there is trauma, chaos, confusion, fear, panic, they need to do what they need to do to save the life, right? But then we enter to bring comfort, calm, and then also addressing what in the life of this patient or the family is the worst day, to be able to then sit with them, to process what's happening, to help them then to figure out how do we exit this world, and or say goodbye to our loved ones. How do we then care for the trauma team that just lost, and worse was when they lose a child, and it hits them, every one of them, right? And to care for them, the team, to help them. We do debriefings and sit with them and walk with them through that journey of their own emotional processes afterwards. So I think that to me is a great example of every day in various settings, but especially in the medical setting, where chaplains are working really side by side with the medical team to not only help the patients and families, but also the medical team to deal with whatever that they had to deal with in that moment of care.
Yes, it is a pleasure to be here with you. It is also a great question to ponder on what makes the team work the best when we really need to come through for the patients and families. What comes to mind is a case where there was a very young military couple who just got married, had a new baby, and they were in Hawaii looking forward to the future of their career in the military. And this service member had an aggressive cancer that the doctor had to come and tell him that it was way past, the aggressiveness had reached a stage where he didn't have long to live. And so once we got the news, we went in to offer the spiritual care needed for the family. They didn't have a lot of things, a lot of the kind of wills and things like that worked out. We worked together in collaboration to make sure all of those things were done. But the service member had a request. He had never got to go to the beach because of his illness. And he asked me, is it possible for me to go to the beach with my wife, in my last days? And I said, we're gonna make it happen. And so I had to work with the medical team because we really don't have jurisdiction to say, hey, let's take this patient outside the hospital. But we went through all the processes to figure out how to get, the wheelchair, the ambulance, and, take the patient to the beach. And he was on oxygen and all kind of other treatment, so it was challenging, but it just goes to say how we can do things when we work together. And so the doctors, the nurses, and all of the staff figured out a way to get this patient to the beach and back. And he was a very critical patient. So that's just one case. There's many, many cases of times when chaplains and medical staff work together to care for families and patients.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story, and there's so many, even those sitting in the audience, there's probably countless stories that you could tell of when a chaplain touched you or a loved one in difficult times. And what I was reflecting on is, in a previous role I was the chief of Army mental health, the whole thing. And that was 2018 to 2022. And as a part of that, General McConville, the Chief of Staff of the Army at the time, and Major General Soljum, the Chief of Chaplains, reached out to Lieutenant General Dingle, who was our Surgeon General at the time, who, oh, by the way, is a minister, and said, we need to align our medical and spiritual professions closer. Fast forward a couple of months, they developed what was then called the Spirituality Readiness Initiative, linking medical and spirituality. But where it came into practice, and this is open source, so I'm not sharing anything that's not available if you Googled it, Alaska had a tremendous suicide epidemic. This was right after the pandemic, where even looking at data, there was certainly a hot spot between both Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson and up in I'm blanking, Wainwright. Thank you, at Wainwright. And what happened was the Senate said, we have to fix this now. There are people that are wearing uniforms that are taking their own lives. And one death is too many. Well, suicide is a wicked, complex problem. I heard social determinants of health mentioned before. And when you have a wicked, complex problem like suicide, you can't throw Dr. Preston at it as a psychiatrist. You can't throw money at it. You have to look at it holistically. And where our chaplains came into play, and where I observe as a non-chaplain medical invested party, is they said, you know, how are we treating these soldiers and their families? They're coming up to Alaska. Some of them, it's the first time they've ever been away from their home. And they're there. What is their purpose? What gets them up in the morning? Because what we do know in mental health is that those that have a divine purpose and meaning are less likely to complete suicide. So the chaplains actually asked the valid question, why are these folks valuable up here? And are we communicating to them their value? And fast forward another year, that group of soldiers that we had sent up were under this command called U.S. Army Alaska, USARAC. They didn't have their own flag. They didn't have their own badge. They were essentially there to defend our northern flank. Well, now it's the 11th Airborne. They have their own badge. They have their own sense of purpose and meaning. Why do you get up in the morning? You are defending the northern flank of the United States and our democracy. That didn't come out of a medicine cabinet. Dr. Preston didn't prescribe that. But we were able to give a group of people through chaplains coming and helping and looking at our community holistically, not trying to throw medicine at it or you name it, but looking at that very divine idea of what is your purpose. And our chaplains are experts at helping folks find their purpose and their what for. And if you Google the Alaskan suicide epidemic in the Army, you will notice that not only giving them purpose decreased the number of soldier suicides, but little things like, we are going to pay for your airfare over the holidays so you can go back to the United States and be with your families. Little things like that make a huge difference, and our chaplains help us see that.
Can I, offer one other way that I see the chaplains really help the service members? And it's on the day-to-day things. And when I was the commander of the 759th FST, it's an airborne unit. You're highly selected for that unit, and we run fast. And when I was there, the 44th Med Brigade commander said, I'm going to use our combat stress team, and once a month, the chaplain's going to come, and you have to interact with them. And at first I said, we are not doing this. We were very cliquish. You're not one of us. And so I told my unit, because they'd come when we do morning PT on the days we rock, I need you all to sprint for the first 15 minutes because we need to ditch the chaplain. And then we'll have fun. So we did that at first. And eventually the chaplain said to me, sir, I know what you're doing. And I was like, okay. So we figured out, all right. So I said, we'll make it a little bit more reasonable. And I told him, stop bringing a ruck. You're not going to keep up with us if you got a ruck on, because we do go fast. And what I found over time by having him interact with people on a ruck march, just on a walk, right? On a walk with a backpack, he could figure out and have a pulse on my unit and be able to come back to me without giving up anybody's personal information and go, hey, you got some stress that you're unaware of, because I thought everything was fine. And it provided a chance for me as the commander to go, okay, I've been pushing these guys hard because we have XYZ coming up. I need to make sure they know that there is an end in sight to what we're doing, or I need to pull back depending on what the situation is. I would have never been able to do that as a commander on my own. There is no amount of me talking to my troops that's going to get all the information I need. But the chaplain coming in non-confrontationally, just going, how's your day going? Oh my gosh, that was a game changer for me. And I see that program then expanded across Fort Liberty, where multiple units are now doing the exact same thing. And I think that's another way that we use the chaplaincy in maybe a different role, but in a very critical role for caring for that service member, not waiting for them to reach a crisis state.
Dr. Plackett, that's a super great point. And I'm interested in hearing from the chaplains. Do you have any stories that you can tell where that, because for a psychiatrist, there are some times where I have to break confidence. But chaplains, you have absolute confidence. How does that play its role out in your own experiences?
So I have two examples. One is in theater in Iraq. My very first deployment with combat engineers, 14th Combat Engineers out of JBLM. There was a soldier, highly stressed out, suicidal. And because of my confidentiality, I can't divulge anything. So I said, we're going to walk together. Are you okay with me walking with you to the behavioral health clinic so I can get you the behavioral health officer to meet with you right now? So he's like, okay, we can do that. So we get to the clinic, and the behavioral health clerk who's doing the in-processing tells my soldier, okay, put your weapon, put the weapon on the rack. And then he says, we've got all these forms to fill out, and then the provider will see you. And I'm like, no, I need a provider now for this soldier. And he looks at me and says, sir, but we got to do all these intake forms. And I said, I will do the damn paperwork. Pardon my language. I said, I will do the damn paperwork. Get a provider now. And he's like, why? I said, I am not telling you why, but I need a provider right now. And I stomped my feet, as we do in the Army. And the clerk said, oh, Roger, sir. Went straight back, and finally, at that point, he got what I was talking about. I did not divulge anything. I walked the soldier in. I said, I will do the paperwork. And we got the provider right then and there. Another time was actually, John Gorley, when I was at the 98th Combat Stress Control in JBLM. Shortly before we deployed, we had a very, very interesting character in the unit, and he was homicidal. He came and told me all these horrendous stories and the plans of harming members of the unit. And I'm like, I can't say anything without breaking confidentiality. So what do? So I went up to the commander's office and said, sir, are you busy? He was like, looks at me, he's piled up in emails and he said, what do you think, Chaplain? And I said, well, I think you should go home. And he's like, what? A couple of expletives. And I said, "Sir, I think you need to really go home now." And he said, "What are you smoking?" I said, "Sir, you need to go home now. Pack your stuff, go home now." And he just looked at me, dumbfounded, a major telling a lieutenant colonel to get out of his office. And he said, "Huh?" I said, "Yeah, you need to go home now." And he said, "Okay, got it." So I never told him what the situation was, who the situation was with, but he got the message and left. And then, of course, the soldier later on then got caught by the NPs, and the rest is well taken care of.
Yes, sorry to follow that one, but when you were talking and you were saying how you kind of wanted the chaplain to become a part of your unit. This is normal for chaplains to have to integrate themselves into a unit. So there's a period of I want to just lean in and say it's a grace period where they're going to accept you or not. And for me, I was just talking to Captain Welch earlier about being at Fort Liberty, and for me at Fort then Bragg, but now Liberty, I kept getting put on every jump. And I'm saying, okay, are they picking on me or what? But what I didn't know was the commander saw the difference with me being on the jump and how better they performed, how, if someone needed to talk to somebody, I was already there. And so eventually I figured it out that they wanted me there. I had done enough initiation to get, accepted, and I was, a big part of the mission, right? Being on the jump with them. And so even though, my jump count was going up pretty high, I loved it because my command saw my value. And so I wanted to just add that to what you were saying.
Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen. I heard you both say that Chaplain Lee, that you preserve confidentiality at all costs for the service member. And that's a critical component for our chaplains, is that the absolute confidentiality privilege that they have to hold to. And then, gentlemen, I also heard you say the chaplains are really integrated in the unit to provide that presence so that they can be that safe, trusted space. Colonel Preston, and to all our panelists, sir, you touched on suicide. So there were 6,134 veteran suicides in 2020. Suicide is a leading cause of death in our service members. Why is suicide the leading cause of death in military service? And gentlemen, can you share how our departments are combating this problem?
Yeah, suicide is a problem. And that is something that we've, as a nation, have admired for a very long time. As I said before, and it's shared pretty much in the mental health community, when you attempt to solve the suicide question, why do people kill themselves, we often get this oversimplified approach. Well, maybe if they had better mental health, or maybe if they were not in food insecurity or in financial hardship, or maybe if they didn't have immediate access to weapons, all independently are contributors. Certainly access to weapons is associated with death by suicide, but what we've observed is wicked problems, and Dr. Craig Bryant from the Ohio State University had a really good book recently called Rethinking Suicide. And essentially, what we keep doing is putting out the fires. Let's concentrate on weapon safety. Let's concentrate on treating depression. Let's concentrate on social determinants of health, food insecurity, financial stability, et cetera, like that. Underserved minorities, LGBTQ, when in fact, it isn't that simple. And there is a line that links suicide, and that is the determination of an individual that they no longer want to exist. That's very spiritual, if you think about it, that somebody comes to the conclusion that they are more valued not being here than being here. And chaplains provide, as I said before, that ability to have and communicate they have the innate ability to communicate the innate being that all of us have value, all of us have purpose, all of us have meaning. And so when we talk about combating suicide, what we really need to do is not try to avoid the bad, but to engender a culture of a life worth living. Each and every single one of you today have a life worth living. I hope you know that. And chaplains communicate that and augment the behavioral health community in a very profound way in communicating we need to focus on providing people lives worth living, not avoiding suicide. So I would say that that is, in my experience as the Chief of Army Mental Health and working with chaplaincies, that's where I've seen a lot of value that have been brought by chaplains.
Yeah, very wise and well-said words. I would just add that both meaning and purpose, along with this idea of belonging, are what really ground us in living a full life. So I think moving forward, we have to ask those questions. What gives this person meaning? Do they even know? And then, do they feel like they belong? You use an example of once they had a unit, a title, that changed everything, because now I belong to something important. I think helping people see that they belong, they're not alone. Whatever they're going through, there's community that to go through it with you. Those are game changers in my understanding.
If I may add to both these gentlemen's wonderful comments, I think one of the things that, for me, as a certified educator of CPE, as well as in my own sort of theological perspective, in which I think in the Army Chaplain Corps always talk about is the ministry of presence. Right? And what that ministry of presence for us, at least the way I understand it theologically, is that I embody the very love, the divine love of our Creator God in my interactions with the soldiers and families. Even when they make me fall out of runs because they were told to go blazing fast so the chaplain will fall out. I actually had that experience at one of the company runs. But even when we are on the runs or falling out or ruck marches or sucking it on the PT field or out in the FTX, just by being with them, working with them, being present with them, for me, it's the embodiment of the divine love that I represent in my faith. And so I think that along with that it's what both of you have said, is such an important thing, especially in the Army Chaplain Corps, that we are part of the unit, we're part of the family, and we are with them day in and day out.
As a surgeon on the south side of Chicago, right, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the biggest predictor of somebody getting harmed by a gun is the presence of a gun in a house. And so while all these points about providing value to that individual, to helping them recognize their life is important, that is critical. But there is a practical piece that at least I see, because I was on last night, the last patient I took care of who tried to take their life was yesterday. And very simple things, the simple act of providing a gun lock So it takes 10 seconds for you to unlock it, give you that chance to go, is this really what I mean to do? The VA, there's a reason they hand out gun locks, because it works, they make it freely available, and there are other practical things we can do just like this to try to help address this problem, to give people the time to ask, is this what I mean to do? And hopefully get them to realize it's not.
Yeah, we were talking about this before when we were sitting kind of before this meeting, and just what Dr. Plackett said, practical. It is just that 10 to 15 seconds of making it a little more difficult for a person to make that choice, that very poor choice, is incredibly important. And I would be remiss too if I didn't just amplify that gun locks and restricting access to lethal means saves lives, period, full stop. And any discussion that is contrary to that is not a discussion about preventing suicide. It's about other things. But if we're talking about preventing suicide and ways to do that, just as Dr. Plackett said, and I hope your patient's okay, those seconds are golden and valuable. And how we as a community, as a nation, provide people those critical seconds is incredibly important.
One thought that I want to add is pre-existing conditions or life trauma prior to coming into the military is also an important factor. Adverse childhood experiences, right, ACEs. There are more studies showing that people who have childhood trauma either are very prone to adult trauma, especially as they enter the military, or they learn resilience or coping, sometimes healthy, sometimes not healthy. But overall, one of the things that all the studies are showing, which then also fits really well with all the studies that I've done, is that those who have a sense of belonging and community are the ones that eventually learn that they're not alone and that they can actually grow through the traumatic experiences and that there is healing and hope beyond. And so an important factor of that, again, is not just the chaplains, but a big part of that as they come into the battalions is to recognize that there is someone who can actually just care for them, see them as a human being that is worthy, lovable, and then life is worth living, that hopelessness is not the end state. Right? So, thank you.
Yeah, and the Army has known this for a while, that we need people to hold us accountable, people that are our battle buddies, that we can call for anything, right? But somehow isolation still exists, and people can figure out how to remove themselves from everyone else. And I think if we could be more attentive to when people are isolated, starting with assignments that are naturally isolating, right? And then also moving into, okay, this person is sort of removed from the group. We should look into why and try to bring more people back into their life. I think that can help us tremendously because if you're here, I can't go through with my plan, right? I need you to leave, I need you to go. But if I stubbornly stay with you, it's hard for you to do that, so.
Yeah, gentlemen, I heard you say, meaning and purpose, instilling that in our service members and our veterans, and instilling a sense of belongingness and connection to curtail isolation. 7 years ago, the first counseling I ever did for the Army chaplaincy, I was in the ER, and my soldier had jumped out of a 2-story building. and his senior leaders were in the room sitting down beside him, and he was on the stretcher. And this is my first experience in Army chaplaincy. He lived, obviously, but I was just telling him, I'm so glad you're alive. And he's like, no, I'm just glad I'm not. I can't believe I'm still alive. And I'm saying, like, I'm shocked, you know, and I'm telling him, no, I'm glad you're alive, and I believe God is thankful that you're alive. Your life matters. And, you know, he was still resistant that night, and then a couple days later, I followed up with him in psychiatric care, and, you know, he just shared, like, and then he showed me his tattoo. He had a tattoo of a cross on his shoulder. He's like, hey, I couldn't tell you this because my command was in the back during the whole time, but I'm just so thankful that you shared what you shared, that you were there with me. And I'm sharing that story in a sense because it reinforced a lot of what you shared here with connection and meaning and purpose, and how I believe, you know, in my faith tradition, God divinely orchestrates our appointments to speak into people's lives. So with that, talking on trauma. So in this discussion, military trauma includes moral trauma, and then psychological trauma. What trend are you seeing for our service members? And if you can also speak on our veteran population, what are you seeing in them and their families? And what kind of care are your departments offering for them?
So, you know, I have to deal with this on a daily basis, you know, at my job. And the, you know, impact of having to repetitively take care of the same injury pattern, to hear the stories, to hear, I mean, on the south side of Chicago, the amount of senseless violence that was not targeted at the individual, it weighs on you, and it tears at you, and it tears at the team. And I see one of my chaplains here, and without people like Julian there to support us, I mean, that is what we do. And we rely on them to help us process and deal with everything. And, you know, I see the same trend with my military unit, where when you deploy, you have those same things that occur. You have to process. If you're dealing with physical trauma, you got to deal with the emotional trauma that goes with that. And for a lot of us, that's going and working out, but for a lot of us, it's also having someone to talk to and to work through that event and get you ready for when the next event comes.
Yeah, trauma is another word that is kind of riddled with a lot of definitions, because one trauma to one person may not be characterized as such by another. And when I look at our current veteran, well, I'm not going to say veteran population, our active duty population, because that's my current tribe, we are not exposed to the combat trauma of the global war on terror, though, do not get me wrong, that is still going on. We are welcoming soldiers back from the Middle East with pretty horrific injuries because they're supporting our democracy and that of our allies. But we're not seeing that kind of combat trauma as we were before. And going back to Chaplain Lee, of the adverse child events that occur, what I'm observing is, frankly, the unregulated, unsupervised bullying that is occurring for our children on social media, and the behavioral health, depression, and ramifications of children treating themselves very publicly, very poorly. And we see this in our Gen Alphas that are coming in and our Gen Zs, that they are highly linked to their persona, not actually their self, but who they project, who they are. And I do believe it is a national imperative for everyone in this room to raise really good kids, or grandkids, or nephews, nieces, et cetera, ones that understand that how they treat each other on social media, it isn't benign. and the amount of bullying that is occurring, it has long-lasting trauma, for lack of a better term, on some of these individuals. And if we are going to be smart about this as a military, we have got to get very, very smart on social media and how we communicate, because that is how this generation is inspired and also how this generation is harmed. And so, again, I think the so what statement is we need to be careful with social media. We need to understand that it is both a platform for goodness, but also can be used, unfortunately, to the detriment of our future generation.
Yeah. The only thing that comes to mind in terms of a trend that I'm seeing is traumas are hard to talk about. So they become this constant thing that a person's holding that they don't have an outlet to unpack, because whatever happened to them in their mind is so difficult or devastating that they don't even want to share that with other people. And so people are holding traumas for long periods of time and with no outlet. And we are a great resource for that, but we have to build a relationship with a person over time for them to feel comfortable and safe to do that. So just know that things like ACEs and traumas are very difficult subjects to talk to someone about. And so it's not an easy battle to win because people are just not talking about it.
If I were to kind of focus on combat veterans, I think one of the issues that we particularly can assist with from the chaplain's lane with behavioral health in terms of PTSD, moral injury, is around the language of guilt and shame. Right? The concept of guilt and shame is uniquely spiritual, right? And so some aspects, I've talked to a lot of behavioral health folks, you can address it to a degree, but chaplains are the ones that can really get to the soul and talk about what's weighing on their heart in terms of really the issue of guilt and shame. And if they have a particular language, a religious language, we can speak that, and we can help them in terms of processing what forgiveness looks like, right? And so that's been an important part, I think, from the chaplain side in terms of working with particularly moral injury.
You know, Colonel Rahim, I liked your comment about people holding things in and not recognizing that it's okay to let it out or that it's occurred with others. And it reminds me when I came back from my first deployment, and it was a Vietnam veteran that, had said, I was at a breakfast with a bunch at the VFW, and he said, "Tim, you're going to realize we all have the same story. It's a different war, it's a different place. We did different jobs, but we had the same story." And Charlie telling me that, made it possible to open up and share. And I think that, is an important thing about dealing with this. And it gets, Colonel Preston, to your comments about social media, to an extent of it's okay to share, but people need to know it's okay to share so they know you are unique, you are special, but your experience has been held by others as well, so you don't need to hide from it. You can lean into it and allow it to be part of your story, not the only part of your story.
And sharing is hard. Processing is hard. Being vulnerable is hard, and then wearing a uniform that kind of reinforces, hey, I have it all together, can be even more difficult. And so I think what I hear these gentlemen saying is, hey, can we be safe, trusted agents in our communities for our veteran population, our families in active duty, and our service members? So Colonel Preston, you mentioned, children. The Department of Health agency reports that pediatric medical encounters are overwhelmingly for mental health reasons. Why? And how are your departments supporting them? And this is for both chaplains and medical professionals.
in general, and it's not lost on anybody in this audience, COVID did a one-over on our kiddos. We are social organisms, and we still do not, as a body writ large, the mental health community, don't know the full impact of what the social isolation during COVID did for our children. We do know that as a result, anxiety in general and depression in children, as you said, has increased. I would also offer a silver lining to that, because if I was sitting on this panel 20 years ago, the discussion on panels like this was about stigma and people seeking mental health care and the barriers, both internal stigma, I'm weak if I seek behavioral health care, or external stigma, you're weak if you seek behavioral health care. Those ideas, that type of internal and external stigma, those are going down in our culture, in our country, which is good. It still exists. So I believe that, strictly looking at face value, more children are engaging in behavioral health. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. It would be easy to say there's something that's causing that, but I would like to also share that more people in general are engaging in behavioral health that normally wouldn't have. And I do believe that our nation is changing slowly towards destigmatizing mental health. I would say that the social isolation that occurred during COVID has long-lasting implications on our children and ourselves, frankly. And I think that it's a good thing that people are seeking health care, both mental health care and health care in general, because of some of the things that they're experiencing as a result post-COVID. But I cannot say there's one thing in particular. Going back to social media, and then I'll pass it to my esteemed colleagues. There is a graph that I have seen, which was shared on the impacts of social media and mental health. I can't remember if it was the American Psychological Association or the American Psychiatric Association, but essentially, if you look at the use of social media and mental health illness in children, it is almost superimposable. And there is the thought process that unregulated use of social media may be causing harm to our children. And to say that, that's a bold statement, but it just asks the question, what are we doing to make sure that our children are being exposed to information that allows them to thrive, not that hurts them? And we have to ask that as parents and as community members.
Thank you. That's great insight. I'm just aware, as a parent and who's been in the military now for a long time, how hard the military life is on kids. And so we can't just ignore that the moves and the readjusting to different kids in different environments, sometimes other countries, the impact that has on kids. And we have to keep that in mind, along with now post-COVID and now also social media changes in the world that, yeah, our kids are very vulnerable to a lot of terrible things if we're not careful.
Okay, what preventive efforts are being made to combat military trauma? Is it preventable?
I mean, I think it is preventable, right? It is about making sure people know that they're part of something that matters, something that has purpose, that they bring value to the team. And whether it's the military or life in general, I mean, that is the secret, right? To making sure people have all of that in their life. So I think we can be there. And I think the things that I've watched over the last 22 years of my career is we actually have a focus on this. We have a discussion about it. We have senior leaders that are saying, you need to provide this. It's not enough to just say, you put your uniform on and thanks for showing up, but I need to make sure as a leader that everyone down to the private understands that they're a part of this team, that they're a valued member of this team, and that they're doing something important, and that that's now the leader's responsibility. And the Army's gone back and forth on its 360 evaluations where the soldier gets to evaluate their leadership. That was one of the things when we were doing it that was helpful, was I appreciated that I could pick someone who I knew was going to give me feedback that I didn't want to hear, but then I knew that I could go back to those soldiers because they'd speak on their behalf, and I can make sure that their questions, their concerns are getting addressed. And I love that we have this focus now on trying to provide that for all of our service members.
Yeah, and I don't know if we can prevent trauma per se. We were talking earlier about football, and I think certain sports and certain activities, we know there's going to be trauma, but how we care for one another after trauma is really more important. And are we prepared for, the types of things that happen when people are exposed to these things? And are we focused on that? Those are some better questions, I think.
I would say trauma is inevitable because life is sometimes traumatic, things happen, right? But it's really the question about not whether we can prevent the trauma, is how we respond to the traumatic events, right? As a community, as a unit. And so I think it's really more about how are we helping one another? How are we being present for one another? And really goes back to then, again, humanizing one another, seeing each other. And so as we talk about even the Army, now it's in the publication, it's part of doctrine. Doctrine says we want our leaders to be empathetic and have emotional intelligence. Well, we can put it in the manual all we want, but we got to help them to actually get there, right? And that's where I focus a lot on my work with our chaplains, is really learning how to be empathetically present with the others, understanding that we're all human beings, we have issues, we'll go through different challenges of life, and how do we help them walk through that, journey with them through these challenges. So it's really, it's about how we respond with one another and as a community.
I really like how you said that. And the Army in general and the military is an outside sport. And we are athletes. Everyone that wears a uniform needs to be able to play the outside sport of defending our nation. And there will be trauma. And the Army's preparation for the inevitable trauma when we support and defend our country is through building cohesive teams. There's nothing that can face trauma stronger than a group of men and women that are galvanized together in a common purpose that they believe in. And we message that, I think, going back to the theme of purpose and meaning, I think we do that very well in the Army. We have codified it in now health and holistic fitness. So we are a regulation-based organization. We like our regulations, our policies, and you name it. And the Chief of Staff of the Army, the Secretary of the Army, all the way down, supports this modality of holistic health and fitness. And it isn't simply just eating, sleeping, and exercising. A portion of holistic health and fitness, as we prepare to build these strong, cohesive teams, is spirituality. There is a chapter in our foundational regulation on how we prepare for responding, how we prepare for war, and getting our bodies and our minds and our spirits ready to fight and win the next war. And that is holistic health and fitness. And again, not a scientific study. It isn't, so I'm going to give out a little data. but it's important. In the brigades are about 3,000 to 6,000, depending on the size and the organization itself. In the brigades that rolled out this holistic health and fitness model, they have noticed a non-statistically significant, but a significant reduction in harmful behaviors, including drugs and alcohol use, suicide, and things like that. So our foundation of building strong, cohesive teams is how we will be able to rise to the next challenge and the next traumas that we're going to face. And holistic health and fitness is how the Army is getting to that.
Great. I want to ask this last question and open up for Q&A. How can the surrounding communities best support our veterans, our service members, and their families?
So I've spoken to several church groups about this. So for faith communities, I think it's really to be able to say our space is safe and available, and perhaps providing meals, because nothing like free lunch, right? Or free dinner to get people together. So I'm a big, my theology is all around eating and community, right? But I think it's really important for faith communities to be able to offer that safe space for veterans and others to gather together to hear their stories and to say that you're not abnormal and you're not alone. Again, going back to the whole community aspect of that. And for non-faith groups, similar. So faith groups can offer the spirituality and the faith-based particular resources, but non-faith groups can be the similar space where it's safe for veterans to come in and share their stories, not fear judgment, not fear being sort of excommunicated, right? And having that space where they can just share their stories and their lives. And this is why even things like VFW and American Legion, they do well because they provide that space for our veterans.
Yeah, I would only just add, working with the Veterans Affairs and, with active duty and Veterans Affairs and universities like this, doing programs like this, making it known to the greater public of what some of the needs are and how we can open our doors to support facilitating some of those needs.
I think events like this, in your own community are extremely helpful. I'm very grateful that the university has an office for military-affiliated communities. I mean, I've never seen something as strong as what we have here on this campus, but by allowing veterans a safe space to meet and to talk, but also allowing it to be a part of the bigger community is important. When I first came here to the university, I was still on active duty, and I lived in a neighborhood, and still live in a neighborhood, where there's a Gold Star family 3 doors down. That's the only family in my neighborhood that understood why the 759 flag was proudly flying from my house, and why my boys and I behave the way we do. There's just not as many veterans out there in the community, and so it can feel very isolating at times, because these values that for almost 20 years I've been living with and have been my way of life, I was surrounded by people who don't know it at all. And my next door neighbor's dad was a veteran, and that's about all he knew about his dad's service. So, I got the thank you for your services, and I certainly appreciate when people recognize that, but allowing the veterans to have space, to be present, to be a part of your community and a visible part of your community so they feel welcome, I think that's a very simple thing all of our communities can do to help support the veteran and the active duty reserve and guard community.
In that theme, I can't follow that, what you all said, but I would like to ask, are there any veterans in the audience? If you could raise your hand. If we could give them a round of applause, please. thank you for your service. I have mild panic attacks. I guess I should talk to somebody about that. Yeah. When I think about transitioning from active duty to veteran status, that transition is incredibly stressful. I am passionate about specifically mental health transition of active duty service members as they transition to the VA. That is something that is unique to veterans. They've known a system, they were indoctrinated where everything was watched. And suddenly, almost overnight, the light switch changes and now you're dependent on that thing, that Department of Veterans Affairs, which is a wonderful organization. And I'm so proud of my own hospital system's alliances with the VA. But for the person that's doing that transition, that is monumental. That is a huge shift. And suddenly they don't have a sick call anymore, or a battalion aid station that they go to. They actually have to make their doctor's appointments. They have to do all of these things. And I think what we can do most for our veterans in all of our communities, especially those underserved communities in rural Illinois or in rural Iowa that are medical deserts, is make sure that they know where they can access that belly button to get them into all of the services, the wonderful services that the VA has. You're blessed in Cook County and Chicago because you have a phenomenal veteran VA and VA community and resources. Fast forward or go to the panhandle of Idaho, it is a very different conversation for our veterans and what resources they have. And I think what we can do is really lean into making sure that virtual and other type of services that aren't available in person, that our veterans know that they can use virtual services, virtual healthcare, virtual behavioral health. This is the 21st century. We need to be able to reach all of our veterans no matter where they are. But again, to those veterans in the audience, thank you so much for your service. And if there's anything that we can do, certainly in my little corner of the world to help you, please let me know.
Thank you, sir. And then we wanted to open up for any questions in this room.
Good morning. I'm a chaplain member with the Illinois Army National Guard. Great, thank you. Each of you gentlemen are in the helping profession where you support others, and probably a lot of people in the room are. Can you talk to the importance of self-care for those that are in the helping profession, and then what does that look like for each of you?
Well, self-care is a big part of a really good CPE program, and I heard a lot of plugs on that earlier, and I think it's easier said than done. Right? Most people who are drawn to the helping professions are more about giving to others than they are to themselves. And so it's counterintuitive for a helping professional to do for themselves, but it is an absolute requirement, or you burn out, right? You crash and burn. So, so just building new muscles in terms of, yes, doing a lot for others, but also for self as you develop into your profession is critical.
In the trauma surgery community, we somewhat jokingly, somewhat truthfully say we all have a series of maladaptive behaviors that help us get through the day. And it's really, for many of us, a combination of things, some adaptive, some maladaptive, and hopefully it's more on the helpful side of the spectrum. But for me personally, it is having family that can be that grounding, right? Whether you're married or not, whether your parents are with you or not, somebody that can be kind of that North Star to remind you that the job can't be the only thing that defines you. And that's like one of the most critical pieces there. Everything else then gets built around that and tailored to what you as an individual need to do. Maybe that's exercise, maybe that's read, maybe that's talk to the chaplain, talk to a psychiatrist, psychologist, or just talk to a friend. But everything starts with where's that grounding in your life, and I'm a believer that it has to be something external to yourself that's going to provide that, because you need that check and balance.
So for me, very practical. I tried golf, but that was actually more stressful. So I've got a nice new set of golf clubs just sitting in my office, and I'm like, well, one day maybe I might actually get into it. I find just moments where I can just relax and absolutely just unplug and do nothing. So I started watching Netflix, and I binge watched Netflix. Like I allot myself 4 hours on the weekend, do that. And then I work out, and that's very helpful. And then for me as an Episcopal priest, absolutely important to get my Eucharist and my service, right? So I try to celebrate as much as I can, or at least be there to hear the word proclaimed and partake of the Eucharist. So for me, that's probably the most important thing for my own self-care.
Yeah, I think just real quick, the flight industry teaches us this really, really well. And that is, you put your oxygen mask on first before you put on your kid's oxygen mask. Lessons learned from United, or this is Chicago, so this is United Town. Yeah. So we need to put our oxygen masks on first, and this is not knowing the demographic of the audience. I'm assuming many of you are in helping professions. As a psychiatrist, I seek mental health. I have a therapist. I need that. I need that grounding because essentially it's making sure that my azimuth is right. I bring with me a whole life of experiences, and I have my own biases, and I have to be aware of those biases. And I get a little azimuth check from my therapist who I trust, who tells me that I might be taking that a little bit too seriously, or I might be blowing things out of proportion. I think we do need that. And if our faith community provides that for us, I also have a wonderful faith community in Clarksville, Tennessee at First Presbyterian Church, then we need to cultivate those relationships. We need to put our oxygen masks on first.
Yeah, and just real quick, if you notice your favorite store that's not a 24-hour store, and you would love to go there anytime you want, but sometimes it's closed, if you ever think about that, it's because the people who run that store need their own time too, right? Because if they left it open, people would come, right? And so as a caregiver, you have to close the store or people will keep coming.
I'd like to, Colonel Jones Ichuk, retired medical corps. I wanted to ask how your vision, and I really appreciated what each panelist said, and the vision for the Army to have an identity with the soldier. Why do we have a recruitment problem?
Recruiting? Wow, that's a wonderful question, and if we could solve that, I would probably not have these eagles on here. That one is the mission of the Army has not changed since 1775, and that is to fight and win America's wars and to deter our enemies. Now, how we communicate that is important, and boy, you're gonna think, God, this guy's obsessed with social media. What is, so it's not an Army problem. And it's not just, I am gonna take this uniform off eventually. It's not an Army problem. When you think of the United States 30 years ago, if you can teletransport yourself back and the image that you had as a nation, and then juxtapose that to the narrative that you have of the United States now. Everywhere you look, we are divided. There's the haves, the have-nots, the reds, the blues, the greens. we need to be able to have a definition of our country that is something that we want to fight and die for. That's the message that we, big we, need to really work on. Because I don't know if we are necessarily sharing that message. I am willing to fight and die for our country. And I am very proud to be an American. And the majesty and the multiple colors and everything that comes with it, the warts and all. We need to make sure that we are instilling in our children that all of the joys of democracy and all of the things that they are benefiting from, that they understand that that came at a tremendous cost. And it is one generation away from losing it. We are one generation away from losing democracy. And we need to make sure we're communicating that. Putting it on the Army, why can't you attract people to kill themselves? Or not kill themselves, I'm sorry. That's the absolute wrong thing to say. Put their life on the line for their country, to die for their country. We have to make sure that we're a country that people want to die and lay their life down for. And I think that if I was going to say it's an Army problem, it's not an Army problem, it's an American problem.
Yeah, just to follow up that great response, when I joined and I saw the service of my parents and uncles and grandparents, there was still a lot of honor attached to it, right? And what are we doing to make sure we communicate that this is an honorable way to serve your country? I think that some of the answers wrapped up in that.
Hello, I am Dr. Brittany Armstrong, representing Olivet Nazarene University as the Director of Career Development, and I am here to help the next generation become service members in chaplaincy. And I currently have with me my administrative assistant from the office, who is Giselle Carvajal, and she is triple major theology, criminal justice, and philosophy. And she marries an Army man in May, and so they both graduate in May as well, so they find their station in December.
Thank you for your service.
Mm-hmm. And so my question is, could you please, so brand new onboarding, can you please explain the onboarding process? And her life is about to change drastically. So what could that look like? And as they bring children into the world too in the future, how might that impact her in her future?
So, I'm reminded when I joined, I had a retired couple, 06s an 06 and 05, so colonel, lieutenant colonel, that had us over to their house. And probably the single most helpful thing in my entire career was at dinner. And provided practical advice, along the way. And I would say for you starting out in that life, that's probably the thing that'll help you and your husband the most, is to have someone that can sit down with you, the two of you, and just tell you what it's like along the way, and to talk to both of you, because it is a different lifestyle. There is tradition and custom, and some of it may be going by the wayside, but some of it is still there. And to have that, background as you start out on this fun adventure. I didn't think when I joined I was going to live in Hawaii for 5 years. Terrible place to have to live, right?
My home state.
So, you just have to prepare yourself for, listen, there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, but it's going to be a fun adventure. And at times you don't have a say over things, but at times you're going to look back and go, wow, I never would have gotten to do that if it weren't for this opportunity that the Army provided.
Yeah, what was your name? Giselle, welcome to the family. So what Dr. Plackett mentioned, and it's so true, that Gold Star family that lives on your street, they knew you before they even said word one to you. They knew generally that you serve and what it means to be a part, and it's a very, very small minority of our country serves, under 2%, where they'll know that you aren't the first person to have all these moves and all these questions. And I would only offer to you, understand that there are going to be people who want to talk with you right away and listen to your challenges. And they will offer their solutions as they understood it in their own experience. So just know going that you're joining a family. It is a big, giant, dysfunctional family, but it's a family nonetheless. And there are going to be people that absolutely want you and your family to succeed. And I'm going to walk back my previous comment, because it is an American problem, our messaging, but the Army, where we can really own our recruitment, is you're joining a loving family that will provide for you and give you a wonderful career and a wonderful way of life. And we do need to message that a little bit better. And so as you go to whichever camp, post, or station that you're going to, just know that you have folks there that are going to want to support you, and make sure that you take it on yourself to just ask for help. It'll be there for you.
Aloha and welcome to the family. I'm from Hawaii, so, you know. Like Colonel Preston said, it is a large, dysfunctional family, but it's also a very loving family, and it's a welcoming family, right? To just understand that you have resources and people to go to, and help is readily available. The difficulty is finding where these resources are, but it's readily available, and there are tons of it. 20 plus years have flown, and I don't know what happened to the time, right? Deployments, TDYs, training, exercises, all of those things, sometimes very difficult on the family, but yet it has been wonderful, right? And part of that is also understanding the purpose of why your service matters. Service as a family matters. My father was one of the first Katusas, Korean augmentees, to the US Army during the Korean War. I would not be here right now wearing this uniform as an American colonel, chaplain, if it weren't for my dad's involvement with the US Army as a Katusa, and his strong belief that we need to do what we can to contribute to the American society when we immigrated, right? And so, lest I get too emotional, it is an important purpose for us to serve. And so, as long as you keep that in mind, I think, and it's going to be a lot of ups and downs, but overall, it's going to be a wonderful journey.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, I'll just say there are a lot of spouses out there like yourself, and they have programs and groups. So seek those out and embrace that. There will be some weird stuff that happens, but there'll be way more good stuff. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much for coming, gentlemen. Thank you so much. My name is Victor Cruz, combat veteran, United States Marine Corps. I've been working here for 7 years. Every single one of you have mentioned the points about suicide today, about having someone there to talk to. I'm a survivor myself. I come from a combat unit. 8 of guys that I served with are dead. 3 KIA, 1 in accident in Kuwait, and the other 4 by unfortunate means. I was about to be the 5th. Now, I know it's kind of hard, me opening up to a bunch of strangers. My apologies. I know I look like a out-of-work musician from Seattle. But thank you so much for coming. And every single one of you have mentioned a wonderful point that has resonated with me. And I'm hoping what I'm about to ask will help anybody else that you may come across in your careers. You mentioned social media, providing a space for veterans to do so, to come talk to somebody about their issues. In the military, we're wound up pretty tight to effectively execute our missions out there. It's a lot of pride, a lot of ego that we veterans have to get through. And some of us don't realize that we're at that point when we're at the precipice, at the brink, that we actually take an action. That happened with me. Luckily, I had somebody to talk to. But it took a lot. My physical health was in danger at that point. How do you recognize that in a veteran? How do you make them understand, to your point on forgiveness, they have to forgive themselves of what they've seen, their trauma? How do you, sorry, I'm breaking, just oof. Sorry.
What was your name again?
My name is Victor Cruz, sir.
Victor, I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I am too.
I am glad that you're here. And the question you ask is kind of the fundamental question. And if we were able to answer that, we wouldn't be thanking people that are here with us, thank God. I would offer that it comes down to access, because everybody's life journey is different. We as a medical, spiritual community writ large, have to be as accessible as possible to be there in that moment. And through 988, the National Suicide Hotline, that was an incredible lift, by the way, that took a lot of lift in the Beltway to get 988 up and running, that we have a National Suicide Hotline, and also social media, using social media platforms so that they're accessible to veterans. So accessibility is one thing, and then time and space is the other. I don't know your story, Mr. Cruz, but somewhere in that story there was a time where you made the decision to live. We need to provide that space, that time for people. A very simple way to do that is through gun locks. Another simple way to do it is by making sure that individuals are able to turn in their weapons safely if they don't feel safe, and they won't fear that they'll never get their rights back. So one is making sure that we're accessible, because every individual who contemplates suicide has a different story that led them there. So be accessible to them, and then also provide them time and space where they can go back and rethink about their life and the meaning that it holds, the inherent meaning that it holds. So I guess I gave a long-winded answer to kind of not directly answer your question, because there is no defined solution. We would do it as a nation or as a country, as a world, if we had that. But providing space and resources, accessibility is where we need to go, and we continue to go.
I would just follow up those excellent words with one more thing, and that's just building relationships with people. And when we have a relationship, I can tell if something is not right with you.
You know, Victor, thank you for sharing. And, you know, you asked, how do we recognize it, right, in the veteran? And that is where the relationship's important, because if you know the person, you know something's wrong. And I have a buddy that served, another surgeon. He was a surgeon for several events that have resulted in multiple medals of honor being awarded. He's seen, from the medical end, the worst side of what happened in Afghanistan. And that and other life events kind of added up. And all of his friends, we were close enough to go, you're not you. And the first thing we all did was ask him straight up, are you planning on hurting yourself, right? And the other thing is, because we were his friends, we also all talked and said, we don't trust his answer. And he didn't realize it, but there was a reason his friends were all calling twice a day for several weeks, until we were all convinced that, okay, He's gone to see someone. He's on the other side of this. He's behaving more like himself. And I think that's maybe one of the other important things is whether it's a veteran or anyone you know, if they're not seeming like themselves and you're worried about it, don't be afraid to ask them, and don't be afraid to keep leaning in on that. If your intuition's saying, I'm still not happy with that answer, I still am worried about them, trust, that's why you have that friendship, and that's why you're there for them.
2 words for me: vulnerability and availability. So vulnerability is not just you. Thank you for your vulnerability, sharing your story with us. But it's more than just you sharing your story, but being open to, and that's where the availability is, being open to hearing from others what they're going through, and you being vulnerable to share your stories. And then again, in that relationship, then you're building, in which then people are able to share their stories, right? I'll tell you one real quick story. From my first deployment, they have a very tight group from the soldiers from that time. And in 2020, when I was in Germany, I got a Facebook message from one of them. It said, "Chaplain, can you talk to one of these guys? He's on the verge right now." I had not seen them since 2006. And they're reaching out to me through Facebook Messenger. But the very fact that they were able to share their stories with one another, and they knew that one of their combat brothers was on the verge of suicide and reached out to me, because they're all out right now, that reminded me, like, the vulnerability and availability to help one another.
Yeah, gentlemen, I heard you say the emphasis on connection and relationships. We have I think UChicago cited like 0.68% veteran population, and so you're divinely positioned to hear these panelists, to educate you and inform you in how we can support our veterans and their families. They have unique experiences, some very challenging ones. And, you know, to heal from these experiences, it requires processing and talking about it. And so, you know, for transition from active duty to a veteran, I mean, they can be in isolated spaces, right? Because they've moved around so much. And so if you have veterans in your communities, these are some of the ways we can support them. I was gonna say amen, but we're not in church. But that's all we have time for the panel. Will you thank our panelists? Yeah. So you are welcome to interface with them after this and join us for light refreshments and drinks. Thank you again for all our men and women that are serving and have served in our armed forces. And thank you to the International House for hosting this event.